Hello, everyone. I'm Darla Winitsky, Vice President of Customer Success at Telcor. And we truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today and spend the next hour with us. We have a packed and practical session for you focused on RCM Gap Analysis for Laboratories, visibility, action, and revenue. Here's a quick look at what we'll be covering. We'll start with the what and why of a gap analysis, why it matters, and how it drives results. Then we'll walk through the RCM lifecycle and the 7-step gap analysis process. And then from there, we'll highlight the most common gaps laboratories face along with the strategies to mitigate them. We'll also share recommended areas to review and key KPIs to track so you can turn visibility into action and measurable revenue improvements. And then finally, we'll close out with a Q&A session. Please feel free to jot down questions throughout the presentation, and then we'll make sure to address them at the end. And as Karis mentioned, please join us this Thursday, September 18th, as we continue our series and round out the discussion. In this session, we'll cover recommended RCM gap analysis tools to put into practice, practical tips and common pitfalls to avoid, a real-world laboratory case study highlighting lessons learned, and finally, how to maintain governance and sustainability of your gap analysis process for long-term success. We look forward to joining us as we take this next step. All righty. So it's my honor to introduce Sandra Pearson. I've had the privilege of working with Sandra in a variety of capacities at industry events, and I'm thrilled that she'll also be presenting at Telcor's upcoming National RCM User Conference. Given the growing importance of performing an RCM gap analysis, we knew Sandra's expertise would be especially valuable to share a broader audience through today's webinar. So with that, Sandra, welcome. It's a pleasure to collaborate with you today.
Thank you, Darla, and thank you, Telcor, for giving me the opportunity to discuss gap analysis with RCM. Why do we need to do this? You know, what are our goals with RCM? We want to make sure that we have increased revenue, that we're looking for efficiencies within all of our processes, and that we're meeting, most importantly, compliance, regulatory compliance, payer policies, you know, all of those kinds of things. So that really is the foundation for why you would do a gap analysis. This is just an overview of kind of what the revenue cycle management process should be in a perfect world. I know that many of us don't necessarily have all of these folks working together with us in RevCycle, but I think it's important to get a full team to be part of the RevCycle team because it really does start before you guys ever receive a reported out order or any of the billing information. It really starts with a clinician. That clinician needs to be educated. You know, what is it that you guys need? How important is the TRF? What elements should be on that TRF? And then, you know, as that information comes into your accessioning and then through your LIS system to make sure that you guys have connectivity so that you're getting all of the information and you have access to the medical necessity information that comes in and that TRF, because sometimes that is the best tool that you have. And then, you know, we kind of know what we do, right? But there's also some things to talk about even within the rev cycle management process that we could look at. We always can look at things differently. New eyes can give us a different perspective to help us work on efficiencies. Next slide, Ms. Darling.
And you know, Sandra, I have to just quickly interrupt, my apologies, but when I saw that you put this slide in the deck, it made me smile because this is exactly how the data flows through the Telcor RCM application, because we are aware that there are a lot of laboratory information systems that maybe can't perform some of these checks that are needed to ensure that you have a clean, complete, and compliant claim. And so thank you for putting this in here. So if you need more information about Telcor RCM, you know how to get a hold of us.
And a really quick question before we move on, can you explain exactly what a TRF is for those folks who may not know the acronym?
Sure. It took me a while to get used to the term TRF because I'm old school. It's basically your requisition. It's the legal order from the clinician that needs to include certain information. I mean, CLIA has information that they say needs to be on the requisition. There's actually information within the Federal Register that gives you guidelines of what should be included on that TRF, as well as, again, this can be one of your best tools to help you meet payer guidelines. So make sure that you guys have some input, into when these requisitions, TRFs, are being created, because they're like the driver, right? They're the first piece of information that you're going to get. So why does a gap analysis matter? This data is unfortunate, but I know I've had this experience with labs that I've worked with and labs that I've worked for. On average, labs, depending on what your annual revenue is, about $5 million a year is lost in denials, and unfortunately, about 86% of that is preventable. And it's just really, digging in to see what the cause is and getting, global support of your organization to work at efficiencies, to make sure that you, the revenue cycle team, have the information that you need to submit clean claims. Clean claims are so important on many different levels. It's going to result in faster cash, which everybody likes that. It's going to help you and your whole organization be stronger with your compliance to payer regulations, to government regulations, state regulations. And it's going to increase confidence with your clinicians that are ordering from you. A lot of times when clinicians are hit up by the patients, or you have people from your organization that are continuously calling them to get more information, it's distracting for them and for their teams. They have it pretty tough too, with shortage of staff and needing to move on to the patients that are in their office that day. So yeah, working to make sure you get all this information up front will definitely help with that.
You bet. And avoid audit risk.
Ooh, now you're talking about the bad word, Darla, audit. So RCM lifecycle, the basics of an RCM lifecycle and what most people think it is all about is just looking at eligibility and benefits, coding, billing that claim, and following up on it. The truth of the matter is it goes much broader than that. I can give you an example of a lab that I actually worked for. And when I was hired, they had lost $10 million the year before, and they did not know why. They had had the same portfolio for a long time, and they had not really seen the losses creep up. It was pretty drastic loss for them. So, I came in, I looked at, my RCM data, I looked at denials, I looked at AR, I looked at the TRF to see, what information was coming in with that specimen, how that information was flowing through the system. And honestly, the tweaks that we made were very minor, but it resulted in not only making up that 10 million they had lost, but actually having about 4 million extra dollars in profitability on the next year. And it was basically prior authorizations. Nobody was doing prior authorizations, not getting medical necessity documentation. Nobody had updated coding in years. CPT codes had changed 3 times by the time we did this gap analysis. And as you guys can imagine, that didn't give the revenue cycle management team a whole lot to work with on the back end. Next slide, Darla. So what are the processes of the gap analysis? We say there are 7 steps. I think gap analysis, should be kept simple. I think if you get too broad and detailed, you can lose your focus a bit. So set your main objective, right? What is it? Are you trying to reduce denials? Are you trying to increase revenue? Are you under audit? That bad word that Darla said. You know, why? Why are you under audit? That's a great reason to do a gap analysis. And then after you've set your objective, map what your current state is. What are your current processes and policies? What is your current state with AR? What is your DOS? You know, what are the codes that you're using, right? What are the diagnosis codes that are being used? What is your success rate on complete TRFs when they come in? Are you getting medical necessity from the ordering clinician? Is anybody doing prior authorizations, whether it's the ordering clinician or anybody in your organization? So that's what I mean by map the current state. What is the now? Then you need to define your target. You know, some people look at national benchmarks. There are some with some of the organizations that support revenue cycle management. They actually have some targets that you can use. But usually within your lab, you have a good idea if you are connected with your finance leader and leadership and your market access team and everybody's working together. You have a good idea of what those targets are going to be, right? You always want clean claims, a good portion of clean claims. You always want to increase revenue, right? You want to decrease denials. So define the target. Then the real work begins. This is where you do your root cause analysis. And, you know, this step may take a hot minute to do because you're going to be building data, right? Gathering data. Actually, I think it's good if you don't work on a daily basis with your sales team, with your market access team, with the intake folks in accessioning, that you actually interview them, sit with them, see what they're doing, find out what their processes are so that you can identify possible areas of improvement even before the information ever gets to the billing department. So root cause analysis. Use your SMART goals when you're doing this. As I said, be specific, keep it simple. Make sure that your goals are measurable. It's important because what you're going to want to do is reanalyze your situation in 3 to 6 months. And you want to be able to show whether the changes that you put in place really made a difference, or are you worse? Oh my gosh, that would be horrible. If you are, you got to go back to the drawing board, right? You got to go back and figure out what else could be going on. So make sure that your goals are measurable. Make sure they're attainable. You know, don't put these goals that you're going to increase revenue by $50 million in 1 year, right? That's not realistic for most of us. You know, so make sure that our goals are attainable. Make sure that they're relevant. Make sure that they really are gonna make a difference. You really want to hit the bottom line, right? And make sure that you put a time base on them, because sometimes these kinds of projects seem like they never end. They go on, and everybody wants to add to something different, especially when they see that your initial is successful. So make sure that you have a time base, and make sure that for each project you do a statement of work, right? And then if other folks have other things they think that you need to add to, do a separate statement of work. You know, make sure that you're able to really complete one project to report out on before you go to another one. And then how do you implement, right? You've got your data, you've looked at where you may have ways to improve, then you got to execute. One of the biggest things with execution is to have leadership support, right? It's going to be super important that you have your leadership support, because it's usually going to touch more people than just the team in rev cycle. And of course you want to measure. You want to measure against your baseline. So whatever your targets were that you defined as your baseline, that's what you want to measure for improvement. And then finally, I'm a visual girl. I love my graphs and my modeling. And I think there are certain people within your organization that are probably the same way. So make sure that you pat yourself on the back. In addition to just reporting what your improvement has been, do a graph about it. Really let your light shine with that. Darla, you got anything to add?
Great job.
All right. So
And just remember, if you need help, Sandra's always available to help as well.
That's right. That's right. Always available. What are some RCM gaps by stage? So we kind of talked about some of these already, but registration, right? I know every lab calls this differently. Some folks call it intake. Some people have it in accessioning. That is an important area to really review what you're receiving from the ordering clinician to make sure that insurance information, that demographic information is not only on the order, but that it's correct. That's going to prevent claim rejections, right? That means you're going to prevent your front end edits because, if your demographic information is wrong, your claim's never going to get all the way in that system. It's going to get denied on the front end. I know one of the labs I worked with when we did a project like this, because we had been sold by one entity and a new entity had come in and purchased us, and they really wanted to, see where we were at and for us to improve, was we got permission to move 2 of our people from the RevCycle team into accessioning. And they actually were doing this when the specimen and the TRF came in. Because I'm old, and this was before we had electronic TRFs, broad scope. So, that made a huge difference to make sure that things were being done up front. Eligibility and benefit and verification, prior authorizations. That's another thing that your front end people can do, whether it is working with the ordering clinician. Some payers mandate that the ordering clinician has to do the prior authorization, or it's gathering that information from the clinician so that your team can do it. Some companies actually will partner. There are some RCM partners out in the marketplace that this is all that they do. And if you would like information about that, I think Darla and I can both share. I know most of the RCM companies like Telcor, they can integrate with these partners as well. And especially if you're doing really complex testing like genomics, some molecular testing, sometimes it's actually more cost effective to partner than to try to integrate it internally. We talked about the requisition. I think it's important to make sure that as you're transitioning to electronic requisitions, that you take that as an opportunity. That electronic requisition has to have the same exact information that your hard copy requisitions used to have. But also, if you can work with the IT team, you can hard code certain areas of that electronic requisition so the ordering clinician cannot just skip over it, right? If they don't give you that information, then they're not going to be able to go all the way to doing the order. And also, it gives you the ability, once you've gathered all that information, that if you do have an audit or you need to appeal a claim, you can save that down into a PDF and use that, because you should have your ICD-10 codes for medical necessity. You should have the CPT codes. You should have the current status of that patient, why the doctor's ordering the test that they're ordering, right? And that's key information for either a prior authorization or to help you with medical necessity. And then coding, I think this is a big one, because unfortunately, there are a lot of people out in the world that give coding advice. You have manufacturers that manufacture your kit. You have consultants. You have payers. You have, all of these different entities. I think it's important that you either have a certified coder or that you've contracted with a certified coder to review your coding. I think it's best to do it annually. Some people can't afford to do that. So if you could do it every, like 2 years, that would be great, because the AMA, especially as technologies are advancing, the AMA work groups are continuing to identify different areas of coding. Like right now, there's a work group looking at a new area of coding for technologies, both diagnostics and med tech, that have artificial intelligence involved, because those are really hard to code for, right? Payers don't know how to pay for them. So it's good to know that folks are looking at that. Also, make sure that you're partnering with whoever it is that you're using for RCM support, whatever system you're using, to make sure that you can hard code certain information within that system. That is going to help you so much on making sure that your coding is aligned on every claim. Also, modifiers. Some people overuse modifiers, like our friend, the 59 modifier. Some folks really don't use modifiers. And then the payer's asking, what are you doing? Right? What are you doing here? So I know the system that I use for coding, it actually will let me know what modifiers each type of ordering provider can use. So it lets me know if the 59 modifier is appropriate for certain tests. And so those things, use your tools.
Okay, so there's a lot on this slide, obviously, right? So I'm curious, in the chat, who out of everybody that's participating receives accurate insurance information, the prior authorization with the requisition, the correct diagnosis code, and then when the transaction comes or the charges come into the billing system, they have the correct CPT code assigned to them. Is there anybody out there that has that? I wish, right? We all wish. So that's why it's important to make sure that you have a solution that validates that information, especially with the coding. Payers have coding overrides. Some payers want to see the CPT code. Other payers want to see the HCPCS code. So make sure that you keep up with those payer policies to indicate which specific code you should be using to the highest specificity. That's a toughie.
Is. And Darla, that's a good call out, because, PLA codes, they're like all the rage now. Everybody thinks they need to get a PLA code. Well, you know what? There are still payers that cannot process PLA codes. Their systems are very antiquated. Some of our state Medicaid systems, some of our smaller local payers are in that same situation. So make sure that you're not only looking at your medical policies for your payer, but you're looking at the reimbursement policies. And if you see that they're denying your PLA code, reach out, find out if there's a category 1 code that they want you to use, right? The other thing with coding, Darla, we have these things called Z codes now. Anybody that's in a MolDX jurisdiction, they know about Z codes. Well, United and Humana, Blue Cross of North Carolina, and a few others are already mandating that Z codes are on the claim for filing. So another important code to make sure that you can have hard coded in your system, if at all possible.
Perfect.
RCM gap mitigation strategies. So what are some things that we can do? So let's look at front end. Automation is the rage. I think with automation, whether it's using AI or it's just using an algorithm through an automated system, that is great tools to use, but that you need to have human oversight. You need to have your checks and balances, because sometimes even those tools can go awry. So you need to be checking to make sure that a certain percentage of the claims, review those, look over the shoulder, make sure. We talked about this, mandatory requisition fields. I think it was really easy when everybody was using hard copy requisitions to just gloss over it and not put it in there. But we have a real opportunity now with electronic requisitions to make those fields mandatory. Train your intake staff. Whether you move someone from your team over to the front end processing, or you just train those folks. I know when I was doing working for a lab, I would put together I called them cheat sheets. I think we're not supposed to call them now. We're supposed to call them learning aids. But I would put together those for them because, like the blues are different, right? And especially if you're working in one therapeutic category, or you're working in with certain technologies. You're not a full service lab, but you're only doing sequencing or whatever. Allowing those people to have some tools so then they know what to look for when the clinician sends the information in. I think that is so important. So mid-cycle, what enhancements can you do there? A lot of systems today are not homegrown. They actually offer where from intake through your lab information system and your billing system, they're all either able to have connectivity, or there's actually one provider that I know right now that it is one system, right? I have worked with homegrown systems before, and it takes a lot of physical intervention to be able to move the cogs of the wheels along and to make sure that all the information that's getting moved along is correct. So again, anything that you can integrate within that, integrate your billing rules. So not just what your payer policies are, but what are your internal billing rules? We all have policies within our billing department, right? So make sure that those are integrated. Conduct QA audits, on your coding. Again, especially if it's automated, or if you have, just live people doing it, make sure you QA that. And whether you're working with your market access team for any updates with payers or payer policies, any changes with that, or you're working with an external partner, it's important that you integrate any of those changes as soon as possible, because it will affect your claims. And then backend optimization. What do we have to do? We all know this. We work our denials, right? We manage those, and we try to manage them in the best way possible. One way of kind of keeping a bird's eye view on all this is by having real-time dashboards to look at your key performance indicators. If your revenue cycle management partner does not offer this, ask them. Ask them to put it together for you, or ask them what data, from the way that they present you the data, how can you use that to set up the KPIs, the dashboard for yourself? Hopefully you're using a partner though, that can do that for you, because that way, you can keep an eye on it every day, and you'll see when you're having changes quickly, not at the point that you're $5 million, in debt because of a policy change that you weren't aware of. Or there may also be a glitch within the payer system. I know our friend United, I've worked those many, many times. And a lot of times the payers don't realize that when they do something new to their system, it causes a glitch in another part of their system. And the only way they know that is if we, as the providers, bring it to their attention, right? Patient financial counseling at intake. I think, I am a big advocate of patient financial counseling. I am a huge advocate of having compliant patient assistance policies. And I think it's an area that some labs don't pay close attention to. I think it's important. It's really hard to lose lost revenue when if you had simply gotten an ABN signed by the patient before the testing started. That would allow you to then bill. The other thing is patients' rights, right? With the No Surprise Act, we really are held more accountable than ever for patients' rights to know what their good faith estimate is up front so that they can make the decision of whether they want this test done, should their payer not pay for it. So if you're looking for some ideas of how to do this, my information will be at the end. I can share with you what I've done with my company as an employee and then those I've worked with. Darla, did you have anything to share?
Well, and the real-time KPI dashboard obviously points out to me, because I know a lot of at different industry events, you hear about batch extracts out of customer systems, and you're like, wait a minute here, you could miss a trend that's happening literally overnight, and it's going to take you a week before you start to see something like that. So, and then patient financial counseling, make sure that you have that patient estimate available. That's a great opportunity for that piece. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about requisitions coming up, so I have a couple more pieces about that one. But perfect, thank you.
Awesome, awesome, thank you. Okay. I think the slide didn't progress all the way.
So which one are you seeing, Sandra?
I'm seeing there. Now I'm seeing the right one. They were on top of each other.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Audit areas to look at, right? So if you've never done an RCM gap analysis, and you're thinking, well, what areas could I audit? What could be my targets, and what am I looking for in those areas? So again, on the front end, demographics, patient demographics, eligibility and benefits, prior authorization, that completed TRF or requisition, whichever your company refers to it as. Those are key elements. That is like the gasoline in your car, right? Without that information, your car is not going to go too far, right?
Right.
Mid-cycle, I'm sorry.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in. Sorry, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard from labs that say, "Oh, it's not our lab's responsibility to collect that information. That's billing data. We don't necessarily work with that billing data, like demographics and eligibility, et cetera." What are your thoughts on that one?
It is, I would say anyone that's under a current CMS cert audit would beg to differ, because it is the lab's responsibility. The lab is billing through the lab's provider number using their MPI number. And as the lab, you have responsibility to make sure that what you're providing on those claims is correct information, and that you have the medical necessity to support it.
You bet. Yep.
So what's another area? Mid-cycle. So we talked about coding consistency, but also charge capture. Make sure that whatever the lab is doing, that is translating all the way over to the revenue cycle team. You can't bill for something on a claim if you don't know what happens. Just like if there was a problem and they either were not able to complete the testing, or there was a problem with the testing, so they were not able to get results. You need to know that, because you still need to keep up with that information within your system, but it will give you parameters of how your coding and your billing should go. And then on the back end, claim submission, denial follow-up, and AR aging. These are all targets. With your AR aging, I think one of the things that some labs fail to do is to have good policies on adjustments and write-offs. And sometimes that can skew your accounts receivable data. So please pay attention to that, because if you're still carrying AR 5 to 10 years, down the line, that is not realistic that's going to be collectible. You have probably exhausted every effort possible. And so having those policies for write-offs and adjustments will help you keep your books clean. Your finance department will appreciate that as well.
And it keeps your billing system clean, because otherwise all those claims sit out pending in the different work queues, and your team doesn't know, okay, which one am I actually supposed to work? with all this clutter that's sitting out there. And there are customers out there that will say, well, you know, we do write-offs every year, but it's from service dates 2 years ago. So they're not keeping it current as it should be. So I agree completely. Make sure you have that adjustment policy in place and you communicate it to your team. The other one that I wanted to point out here is the charge capture and coding consistency. You know, the big one to me is always the toxicology testing and counting those drug classes and making sure that the requisition is structured based upon what your payer requirements are. There are some payers that only will support a G0480, for example, or a G0481. They won't allow you to go to the full 3-tier. So kind of keep those things in mind when you're looking at that coding piece, that you want your requisition to be structured appropriately based upon what your payers are requiring. And then the other piece with coding consistency is if you're doing, for example, anatomic pathology testing, and you're looking at those stains and you know that you're going to bill out the 88342, but for some reason an 88341 comes through as a charge and there isn't an 88342 with it. That right there's a flag, right? You want to make sure that you have the ability to keep track of any of those conditional requirements for those codes to be billed together.
Very good. That's great input. Same thing with flow cytometry, right? If you're billing for flow, you got to have the code for the initial probe before you can bill the additional.
You bet.
Very good. All right, next slide. So these are some key performance indicators that would be really good if you're setting up your dashboard to take a look at. We put some targeted benchmarks on the slide. Every lab is going to be different. So I think you need to work together as a team, both within your revenue cycle management department, but also with your leadership team to actually set what is acceptable within these benchmarks. The one that I'm kind of passionate about is first pass clean claim rate. That's another one that's hard to say really fast. I think it's so important to do clean claims, you know, and we have so many opportunities for quality checks along the way to make sure that we are, you know, sending out a clean claim. I know the last audit I did, 50% of the claims being sent to the payer never made it through front-end edits because they weren't clean claims. So the team didn't even understand that, right? They didn't understand those claims weren't being totally processed, that the payer sees that as not even being submitted. So again, work with your team, set your benchmarks, and monitor it. Ms. Darla, do you have anything additional?
I have one on one of these coming up, but no, not on that one.
Okie dokie. Okay.
I don't know if you see your full slide. Yes.
It's not moving.
Oh, it didn't? Okay, so, and I do want to talk about the days in AR. So you can see that it's showing less than the 40 days. With that one, the critical piece with the days in AR is, besides the adjustment piece, but those unresponded claims. There are a lot of customers that don't have the ability in their current systems to go out and see which claims are still pending. So, you know, they're like lost out in la la land. Make sure you keep track of every claim that you actually submit and you know where it's sitting within that billing cycle.
100%. 100%. So final thoughts before we go to Q&A. You know, RCM is a dynamic cross-functional process. You know, it's not stagnant. RCM is always changing. I learn new things every day. I'm sure Darla learns new things every day. And it's important that you are, you know, offering continuing education to your staff, that you're doing it yourself, right? That you get to see what's changing, and make sure that your RCM process is cross-functional, because as a revenue cycle management team, you can only do so much. You have got to have support from different departments, you know, market access and your customer service and your sales department. You know, it's really important that it's cross-functional. Continuous monitoring and training, right? We talked about training, but we got to be monitoring those KPIs, right? You don't want to have the cat running around while the mouse is away, right? Or it might be the other way. Use automation and analytics to drive improvement, but make sure that you're also doing human quality checks of automation and artificial intelligence, just to make sure that it's working the way you need it to work. And then always remember, prevention is more cost effective than recovery. Anything you can do on the front end to ensure a clean claim is much more cost effective than doing the rework that you have to do on the back end to manage appeals and AR and write-offs and all of those wonderful things. Darla, you have any final thoughts?
Oh, just remember the 7-step process. And when we come back together next Thursday, we will recap today's session and specifically talk again about that 7-step process, because that is the critical piece. And it doesn't just happen once, right? It's something that you should be evaluating on a regular basis. So thank you, Sandra, very much for sharing such insightful information on the importance of performing an RCM gap analysis. Your expertise and clear breakdown of the process are incredibly valuable, and I know our audience gained a lot from your perspective. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We truly appreciate your time and engagement. Before we wrap up, just a quick reminder, this Thursday, September 18th, we'll continue the discussion with our follow-up session. We'll dive into recommended tools, practical tips, common pitfalls, a laboratory case study, and then how to manage a governance and sustainability of your gap analysis process. And we'd love to see you back with us for that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and turn it back over to Karis.
Yes.
Thanks.
Great job, ladies. You see on the screen in front of you, you have the QR code. So if you're sitting there at your desk and you want to connect with Sandra or Darla, you can just point your phone at those and that'll take you right to their LinkedIn page. Now, to get to the questions, we do have 10 questions out there, so we will try to do our best to get through these. First one, are other labs having issues with claim denials due to the DX codes billed on the same claim that cannot be on the same claim?
Yes, I mean, that is an ongoing issue. There, sometimes it's because of NCCI edits. So it's important that whoever your revenue cycle management partner is, that those tools are included in the system so that those audits, come up while you're processing the information through. Darla, do you have any other thoughts on that?
You're good.
All right, next question. Whose responsibility should it be to get the prior authorization?
Well,
I love this question.
I used to work on the payer side, right? I've worked at First Coast Service Options and I've worked for the Blues. So I probably have a unique perspective about it. The ordering clinician is the holder of all of that medical necessity information. So, realistically, they should be the one that's doing that. We do have some payers that stick firmly to that thought process, and they will not allow the lab to do the prior authorization. I know when I was at Genoptics, we were kind of on the front end of this. Oh, we're going to do that for the doctors because we want to make our doctors happy and make things easy for them. So it's kind of become kind of the standard that where the lab can do the prior auth that they do. But again, if you're not getting that information, I think, the sales team, they always want the doctor, the ordering clinician to be happy. Well, then they need to put some skin in the game and educate the ordering clinician and their teams on how to complete a TRF, right? What is it that makes medical necessity for your testing, and make sure that it's sent in for you. Because without that, it's a nightmare to try to get a prior auth, right? And the time that it takes for the lab team to get back on the phone to try to get someone from the ordering clinician's office to send information, to send the right information. You know, it's mind-boggling. People who haven't had to do it don't have a true appreciation of it. It's hard work.
It is hard work. And I kind of have a different position on this one. So in my eyes, if you're receiving a lot of prior authorization requests, the first step would be to reach out to that payer, because what they most likely are saying is, we don't understand your test, right? If you're a genetic lab, they want you to meet with them, explain exactly what you're doing. If there are different validations that they're requiring of you to go through that process, then exercise that right and go through the process with the payer. So first step should be engage with your payer, make sure they understand the type of testing you're performing, and then make sure that if there's policies, if they're medical policies or it's a negative payer policy, you want to make sure to help advocate and try to get that policy changed so that it doesn't have that requirement on there.
Yep, that's another opportunity for cross-functional team, right? Working, because I know in every job I've had, I have been hip to hip with market access, you know, the revenue cycle team and market access, because they are the conduit for you to those payers. And Darla's absolutely right, you know, especially if you have a new proprietary test or technology that's on the market. You know, as much as we want to say, ooh, that bad payer, but they don't know what you're doing, right? So they don't know how to adjudicate your claim. So that's a really great call out, Darla. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm glad you brought up the connection between the revenue cycle management and your payer access or your market access team, because in reality, those two teams do work hand in hand. And I can tell you that from experience. One of the labs I worked at, we had a great relationship with our market access team. And so we would, if we received a group of denials, we would turn that information over to our market access associate. They would help us fight the fight to get whatever it is, coverage, reimbursement for that specific payer and that specific test. On the other side, a different lab that I worked at, we did not have that type of relationship with market access. And so we were kind of at a stalemate with talking to payers and trying to make progress. It wasn't a congenial type of thing where we were always, it's just keep that relationship going. It's critical, and knowing that your market access person can help you with denials.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually,
all right.
I can tell you.
All right, let's get on to another question here, so that.
Okay. Sorry.
So as a supervisor at a small POL, how aware do I need to be of the RCM process?
You absolutely need, if you have a physician-owned lab, it is 100% just as important as if you are in an independent lab. You know, physician-owned labs are still responsible for medical policy. They're responsible for the prior authorization. They're responsible for correct coding. They're responsible for understanding the reimbursement policies of that payer. You know, so there really, in my mind, is no difference. So 100% you need to be aware and involved to understand what's going on, right?
All right. How do you track denials for duplicate claims or denials because one's CPT code is paid and the other is not, which unnecessarily inflates the denials?
On your EOBs that you receive from the payer, there are different codes. There's a different denial code for duplicate claim than there is for a medical necessity denial, or, you know, various different denials. And I think, you know, tracking your denials by those denial codes are extremely important, because, you know, medical necessity denials should be worked differently than any of your administrative denials. You know, if it's because you know, accidentally sent in a duplicate claim, well, you can notate that in your system, right? That's an easy fix. Or if you got, you know, a lot of times information gets transcribed with your demographic information. Easy fix. Somebody within your RCM team can do that. But medical necessity, you're going to have to collaborate with that ordering clinician to make sure that you have the most robust information to submit on that appeal packet.
That's right. And then, of course, make sure that you have a revenue cycle management solution that allows you to see what those classifications are based upon those denial codes. So if you're getting in an 18 that you want to label as a duplicate claim, then when you go through and do your advice trending analysis, you're able to remove the 18 out of that specific report, because that's typically something that you would just need to evaluate on a different basis.
All right, I think one more. There's a couple other questions that I think they are long answers and some good discussion, so we're going to hold on those. But for the last one, how do you work denials for units by Medicare or Anthem? Is there something that can be done on the front end to reduce those unnecessary denials?
Units of service, I would say, you know, within your coding apps that most of us use and within your revenue cycle management systems, there usually are what we call MUEs. That lets you know the maximum unit edit that's allowed. And if you bill for more than those, the payers usually just won't pay for them. They don't usually just outright deny them. And I think you have to educate everybody within your team that, you know, if you're looking at 45 pathogens, but the maximum for testing the individual pathogen is 13, fine, test your 45, but you're only going to get paid for 13, right? So I think it's important that you're educating, you know, even all the way back to your, you know, your ordering clinician, but definitely within your lab.
Yep. And again, make sure you have a revenue cycle management solution that supports those MUE edits.
Yeah.
And then there are, Karis, I know that we're not probably going to get through all of those, but if everyone joins us on Thursday, we can continue the conversation at that time. So
100%.
Exactly. Yeah. So these questions that didn't get answered, obviously we'll share with Sandra and Darla, and they can either kind of weave the answers into what they already have ready to present, or we can address them at the end of that one as well. So we're going to wrap this one up for today. Thank you for so many of you joining us. And Sandra and Darla, you did a fantastic job and truly appreciate your time and energy. And looking forward to Thursday's webinar.
Thanks you all. Everyone. Good afternoon.